So the Maidens is, I guess as a writer, I guess as all writers would probably attest to the fact that you're kind of drawn to the same themes again and again in your writing. And for me, my key themes, I think, which I established in The Silent Patient, are, psychology, Greek mythology, and murder. And they kind of, they work well together, I think. And that's what The Maidens is coming from as well. So it's about Edward. It's a story about a charismatic and sort of enigmatic Greek tragedy professor at Cambridge University called Edward Foster, who is suspected of murdering his students, who are all members of a secret society known as the Maidens. And the heroine is a group psychotherapist who is convinced of his guilt and is determined to catch him, even at the risk of endangering her own life. And so it's definitely a kind of breed of psychotherapy and Greek mythology and psychopathy, I think, in fact, yeah.
And I wondered how you try to create an ending that's going to pack a punch, but still be believable and fit in with what you've written in the rest of the book.
I think, I love those kind of endings, as you can probably tell. I think the first time I ever really felt like this was seeing the film The Sixth Sense when I was a teenager. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen something that at the end, it completely spins everything on its head. And so the first thing you want to do is go back and start the story again to try and understand it from this different perspective. And it's something that, Agatha Christie does brilliantly as well. And so many other writers. I have a bee in my bonnet that Henry James and Agatha Christie aren't actually that far away from each other, because they're often, writing about love triangles, but they present it from one angle, and you go through the whole book thinking you're seeing it that way up. And then at the end, you find out you were looking at the triangle from the wrong end. And there's something about this ability to kind of turn everything on its head, but still hold water. So you're essentially telling two stories, really, which I find to be, really fun and fascinating and really hard to pull off. But it's almost like a visceral, emotional feeling. So you're not necessarily just reading words on a page, but you actually feel a sense of shock at the end, which I think is a really powerful thing. And if you can put that into a novel, I find that very exciting. This crazy thing happens in groups where, in large groups or small groups, we tend to infantilize ourselves and regress to a very young part of ourselves, and we make the group leader into our father or into our mother. And often we find it very hard to disagree with the group. We find it very hard to stand up, walk out as I did, or challenge the leader. And then you just have to look at, history, politics throughout history to see often when we put our faith and, trust in a group lead, in a kind of cult-like group leader like that, they turn out to be completely insane. And it's a very interesting thing, this whole process of trust in human beings and what that looks like in relationships and in groups. And that was what I wanted to bring into The Maidens as well.
My understanding is both The Silent Patient and The Maidens have been optioned, are heading for screen adaptations. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. The Silent Patient is going to be a movie, and The Maidens is going to be a TV series. But I am not involved in either one by choice, really. The Silent Patient is being made by Plan B, who I think make the best films in Hollywood. And so I'm incredibly excited about that. But I want to see it. I'm not even going to read the screenplay when it's ready. I just would rather go to the cinema and, and sit there with some popcorn and watch it as a fan, because I think that's going to be more meaningful to me. And so it would be ridiculous of me to try and control the film adaptation of one of my books. I think it's, good luck to you, and tell a different story based on mine, And so I think what we do is we lie to ourselves about a lot of stuff. And I think we lie to ourselves about the people we're closest to very often. And we operate in this state of denial. And so I think what I was trying to do with The Maidens was to dramatize what it's like to be in darkness, as Mariana or Oedipus are at the beginning of those books, and then grope your way towards the light. And so it's this process of just trying to unpeel and uncover the truth. And it's kind of like a psychological detective story, I suppose, is how I put it best. And it's a very interesting process trying to do that. It's about layers, I think.
But what I did, since seeing this is a very specific podcast, and I've never said this in an interview before, but I will because it's you and we're here and we're talking about it. I don't think I'm ever going to speak about it in such detail again with somebody. I just didn't have any ideas. So I'd spent 5 years writing The Silent Patient, and it put my whole heart and soul into that book. And then I sold it October 2017. And then that weekend, my brand new agent rang me up and he said, "Oh, by the way, it's a 2-book deal. I didn't mention that. So we need just at least a synopsis or a tiny blurb by Monday of your next book." And I was like, I was planning on taking, 4 years off. I have no idea what you're talking about. And the ABC Murders was there on my coffee table. And I just looked at it and picked it up and I thought, okay, okay, I can do a response to this, which is why it's very self-conscious in the sense that it's set in Christieland, and I use the word dazzling, and I'm using the Duchess of Malfi quotes, and I'm just trying to pull, and there's Tennyson, she's obsessed with as well. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to make it into like an homage to or response to all of her work, and then these other writers as well who were a big part of it. Like Dorothy L. Sayers, that led to Gaudy Night, which was one of my favorite novels, and then that became, when I wanted to write about Cambridge at Cambridge College, and so it grew from. It was the only book I think I will ever write as a fan. Of something, and just trying to live in that world, create that world again. That's what's a nice joy about it, is that it took me a long time to write, 2.5 years or whatever. In that time, I've now had many other ideas. So it's brought me the time where I feel like, okay, now I can start writing more original stuff. But if anyone does say that it's derivative, then I'll probably say that's probably fair enough, because it was, intentionally so.
Another quote in this chapter is, "Boundaries is what therapy is about." And I found that a really interesting quote because I really believe that it is. For example, if you have a trauma in your youth, you will not have learned boundaries properly. Your boundaries will have been destroyed by the traumatic experience. And that is something you can regain through group therapy. I think one of the biggest things that I learn people in therapy, regardless of their problem or their background, is maintaining emotional boundaries. A lot of people that I see give either everything or nothing, and both ends are really unhealthy. So yeah, I really like that quote, "Boundaries is what therapy is about." Another thing that I really liked about The Maidens is the investigative and inquisitive nature of the main character. That really gives you a feeling of this mystery thriller detective book. You want to find out who did it. I also really like the university setting. I mean, Cambridge is an awesome place for a story. Throughout the book, there are these chapters that are from the perspective of the perpetrator, and that is without knowing who the perpetrator is. So you know that he is male, but you don't know his identity. And you can gather a lot from these chapters because he speaks about his childhood trauma. There is some abuse, there is violence. He also talks about his mother, what she did to him, basically neglecting him. And he also talks about his father, who has some of the same tendencies as the perpetrator. And what you can gather from these chapters is that there are antisocial personality traits. There were also some things that I didn't like about The Maidens. First of all, Mariana's serious, and I mean serious, lack of judgment. So Mariana is this renowned and experienced group therapist that mentions several times that she's really good at what she does. But let me tell you, she missed a lot of things, like a lot. I can kind of get over the fact that you missed that your spouse is banging your niece, who was at that time 15 years old. Like, that's wrong on a whole nother level. But you also missed the fact that he was not really that happy with you. And then you also missed the fact that Zoe turned into a whole nother person around that time. And you were telling me that you're an emotionally in tune psychotherapist? Like, come on, if you're really good at this work, then you have kind of this sixth sense when it comes to emotions. You pick up a little things that other people do not. That's why you're good at your job. You can feel certain things, you can see certain things from body language. It's the little things that you pick up that make you a good psychotherapist or a good psychologist. And you raised an antisocial girl, because that's basically who Zoe is. She turns out to be this antisocial, traumatized sexualized girl and you raised her. What happened there? So basically, Sebastian, her spouse, is this master manipulator, but she totally missed that. And then on top of that, her niece, Zoe, turns into this antisocial girl. I don't get it. You're emotionally in tune, you're a group therapist, you're good at your job, but there's two people in your direct environment that were very unstable and unhealthy. It just doesn't feel credible. There would have been signs. Another thing that I really disliked, and this is wrong on so many levels, not just from a psychology perspective, but from a lot of different perspectives. All the males go for very young girls. I just couldn't ignore it. There was just this pattern of middle-aged men young girls. And I mean, from 15-year-olds to 20-year-olds. I get it if you mention it once, but there was seriously a pattern. And I just don't get why the author would repeat that so many times. It's almost like there's this hidden message that guys manipulate young women and that men are just worth more and are more important and have this authoritative position towards young girls. And yes, the main character is a woman, but she basically fails and she is manipulated by a man. And then all the men in this story have important positions, and then the girls are these gullible, weak persons. I don't know, I didn't really like that message. And I would have loved to see more details of the relationship between Zoe and Sebastian, because that is barely explained. I also had some other questions, but those are mainly about the writing style. Why does every male have to like Mariana? Again, I feel like females are sexualized in this story because literally every male that she encounters feels something towards her. They either want to sleep with her, or they want to date her, or they want to have a relationship with her. I mean, who is this Wonder Woman? And why would anyone tolerate her meddling? She just walks around the university and just talks to everyone, goes into rooms that she shouldn't go in. Like, what is she doing there? Why is everyone just approving that? I mean, even the police mentioned that she should stop meddling. And why isn't the university taking measures? I don't even remember at this point, but I think there were like 3 dead bodies found at the university. We shut down for the virus. Why don't we shut down for 3 dead bodies? Like, come on. You would honestly go to a university where 3 dead bodies were found with nobody in custody. Would you honestly still go? And would a university still just open their doors for their students? I don't think so. I don't think so.
With you that influenced me during the writing of The Silent Patient. The first is Agatha Christie, 5 Little Pigs. I grew up in Cyprus, where I spent the summers devouring Agatha Christie books, and they made me into a writer and a reader, really. And this is my favourite of all her novels. Hercule Poirot investigates a murder that happened 16 years ago. And there was something about that, about investigating a murder that happened in the past, that really caught my imagination. And that's why in The Silent Patient, the murder takes place 6 years before the book begins. And I wanted to try and write a kind of psychological murder investigation, a kind of psychological detective story. And Agatha Christie was a major inspiration. So for my next pick, I would like to choose The Drama of Being a Child by Alice Miller. So my book, The Silent Patient, is about a psychotherapist. And I went on a long journey myself, having studied psychotherapy, having been in therapy, having worked in a secure unit. And I began this journey because of Alice Miller and this book, and discovering and reading this when I was about 19, 20. I'd never read anyone be honest about childhood before and how painful and how difficult it can be. And I quite frankly say this book changed my life. Okay, so to finish off, I'd like to talk about this book, Mythos by Stephen Fry. The Greek myths have been a major inspiration to me, and particularly for The Silent Patient, which was my attempt to update the myth of Alcestis, which Euripides turned into a tragedy. And before Stephen Fry's book, I used to have to rely on Robert Graves' book of myths, which was unwieldy to say the least. And what I really love about this book is the way that Stephen's managed to retell the stories and really bring them to life in a way that's sort of accessible and at the same time hugely entertaining. I love this book.
I try and meditate, once or twice a day, but when I'm writing, I tend to meditate 3 times a day. And this started with my first novel, The Silent Patient, because I just made myself this promise that I would be entirely sober for the whole writing period. I never drink before writing, but I would be sober all day and all night. And I would also meditate before I wrote a word. And I've stuck to that with the second novel, The Maidens. I just think, it's not everybody works in different ways, but I find that if I meditate, once or twice before sitting down, my mind is clear and I'm able to kind of dive underneath any anxious or negative or critical thoughts that I have. They still occur, but after you've meditated, somehow you're able just to kind of park them to one side and continue writing. Whereas I think if I didn't meditate, I would get really crippled by these self-critical thoughts, which are pretty relentless. So I do that, and then I write, but the actual writing of the book, the first draft, I'm always sober for. And I personally found that if I am sober, if I've had a heavy night boozing, the next day the words don't come and they're messy, and also I can't really focus when I meditate. But there's also something else going on too, because I think alcohol deadens your subconscious. And so what I found is when I don't drink, say for 6 weeks while I'm writing the first draft, I go to bed thinking about the book. I'm dreaming. On some level, my mind is working, and I wake up thinking about the book. Whereas if you get smashed, you don't think about anything. You just kind of barely function. And so there's something about really being in touch with my unconscious or subconscious that I find very important, because it comes from wanting to do my absolute best job, because the first novel, I thought it would be the only novel I would write. It took me 20 years to get down to it. And so when I finally sat down to write, I thought this has to be absolutely my best job. And for the second novel, I felt that I had to, the worst thing for me would be to write a second novel that was a disaster and then blame myself because I'd been drunk through it. So, I thought, okay, I've got to show up. And so, even if the novel is no good, I don't really know. It's hard to judge one's own writing. I know that I did my absolute best and I showed up for it every day. So at least I have that to hold on to.